For me, the 90s was the decade of Britpop and Cool Britannia.
Music was the focus of youth culture, and youth culture was culture.
Of grunge and girl power.
If you don't like Wannabe, you've got a dead soul.
Of rave and reconciliation.
It was a decade of opportunity, of hope, of change in all areas of life.
A time when young people gatecrashed the mainstream and took over art and television.
I think it's one of the few decades in British history where it doesn't pay to be posh.
It felt like we had won, and it was completely brilliant.
And there were some wild moments along the way.
When she reached 18, nothing stopped her. She actually went like a volcano.
Those are the days, Anne.
They certainly were, darling.
During the 90s, I went from teenage raver to ginger spice to solo star. And I'll look back on it as a time of real opportunity when Britain was at its very best.
Just looking back, I've realised the 90s really was a snapshot of a time that went, yeah, it's okay to be you, it's okay to be yourself. We'll celebrate that.
So this is me in 1990, a year of massive changes all over the world. The great Nelson Mandela Walk to Freedom. Europe celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall. And Britain's Iron Lady, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, resigned following the poll tax riots.
We're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11 and a half wonderful years.
Yes, I was one of Thatcher's children, a teenager during the 80s, and I was brought up in Watford, North London. And even as a kid, I was dreaming of fame and fortune. And that's me with my lovely dad. We weren't a typical working class family. Dad was British, my mum was Spanish and much younger than him.
She's lived here longer than most. Yeah, she's still got a really strong accent. She's never lost it.
She always been very happy child and very happy girl, and she was very kind with people too. But I never thought, honestly, truthfully, I never thought she would be so famous like that. You always try to show off, do you?
Really?
Look, say for people, oh, look at me, look at me, look at me. Singing all the time. You love it, the performance.
It must be a bit annoying.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you get in people's nerves,
Yes,
but it's
of
all right,
course.
you know.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but you're a lovely girl. Mwah!
It's really funny being here. It really sort of brings back so many memories. My dad used to run his second-hand car dealer business from here. And so he'd always have like lots of different cars outside, like Hillman Imps, about 3 of them, and he'd be tinkering along and all his fingers were all greasy, and the phone would always be going.
Thanks to my dad, one of my favourite toys was a little red sports car. I dreamed of owning a real one just like it.
I remember actually when I was a little girl, I was probably about, I would say about 7 or 8, and we had a loo in the back garden, okay, an outside loo, and there was a little step, and I remember sitting on that step writing my first kind of song poem thing. So living here, I had this like big master plan that, yeah, somehow I'm gonna, you know, get rich and famous. And that was the dream.
Every day I hear a different story. People saying that you're no good for me. So you love away.
For 2 local North London boys, that pop dream had already become a reality.
I loved Wham for so many reasons. They were great fun and the music was just brilliant. I remember, like, all these girls would go and stand outside Andrew Ridgeley's house, you know, because he was the good-looking one. But I liked George. I had no idea what side of the fence he was on. But latter years, I tried to flirt with him and it didn't work.
To begin with, I didn't really fit in at school. I felt like an outsider, a girl from the other side of town. But getting into grammar school was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
This was a life-changing experience. The education that it gave me was fantastic, but it also had a lot of tradition. You know, I had to wear a boater, you know, one of those straw boaters. So it's quite funny, you know, it's a little scrappy kid from the other side of Watford coming here wearing a boater and really having to fit in with these girls that were from probably much more privileged backgrounds, actually.
I've such great memories of my school days, but there were times when problems at home were difficult to deal with.
Like a lot of people, more so these days, my parents divorced, and I think I was at that age where I was old enough to understand what was going on, but not really old enough to have the sort of tools to process it and cope with it properly.
It was a tough time, but whenever I struggled with anything, I'd turn to my music.
So this song, looking back, is, you know, quite meaningful because I think ABBA were going through their own breakup. You know, songs that have always been like the soundtrack of our lives, you know, so you hear that again, you're transported back. So that song means something to me.
As a teenager, I was very insecure and really lacked confidence, especially with boys. So when Madonna became a star in the mid-80s, it made me and millions of other girls feel so much better about ourselves.
I think teenagers can connect to feeling trapped. You're too old for the teacup ride, but you're not big enough for the big wheel. You're somewhere in between. And I think great pop records, when they wrote about that kind of thing, you really connected to it. And I think that's why I connected to Madonna.
And you can dance for inspiration.
I remember going to see Desperately Seeking Susan. I think you had to be 15. And I think I may have been 12, and I remember putting socks in a bra. I didn't even wear a bra. I got in, I was like, yes! It was very, very unairbrushed. It was like, yeah, this is me with all my little rubber bangles, and this is me with my 3 bras on at the same time. You know, the music was great, the story was great. I was just blown away by it.
So that's me at 17 in 1989, a wannabe Madonna who decided to quit school. And even though Mum didn't agree with me, she always supported me.
She has stood up for me and been by my side, and she's got this very strong character.
You look like Marilyn Monroe there. It's nice, isn't it?
No matter who you are, whoever I've introduced her to, she's like, what? What do you want? What do you want with my daughter?
Here's my homemade silver rave outfit. When I turned 18 in August 1990, the new music scene gave me the opportunity to be even more rebellious. I loved being part of the rave scene and the way it united young people in clubs, warehouses and fields across the nation.
The 80s, if you were doing well out of it, was an individualistic decade. It was the decade of the yuppie, of the bond trader, of the big bang in the city, about me, me, me. And the culture that arrives at the tail end of it isn't about that at all. It's a revolt against it. It's about loving each other.
The ethos of rave and of club culture at that time was this real thing of togetherness, of shared experience, that we were all in it together. The music I think of at this time is early Chicago house, Frankie Knuckles, 10 City, Joe Smooth, tracks like Promised Land, which have this almost reverential, kind of slightly biblical, gospel-like air to them.
God bless my mother. I'd been such a good girl up until I was 17, and then suddenly I'd met these people to say, come raving, and I remember coming back to my mother going, Mother, I found my people. She was like horrified.
When she reached 18, nothing stopped her. She actually went like a volcano.
So was I a nightmare?
So
a bit?
Oh, well, it was a nightmare. But it's better you be a nightmare when you are a teenager.
Yeah. The cross-section of music that I was loving was such a wide range. There was like Frankie Knuckles, there was Candice Statton, Little Louie, Alison Limerick. Don't reach out to me with an apology. I loved it when it was like a really heavy bass, but then something really melodic and that touches you and you're like, yeah, I feel it.
I knew there's something was special about the song, and I was gobsmacked at how that so many people in a room could react to one song. That was nice. It was really cool. The mix that it got in America with Frankie Knuckles and David Morales just took it to another level, and it's that mix that went on to be loved by lovely, lovely, lovely audiences around the country and in America. I've had people who have said that they wouldn't have been born if it hadn't been for my song, which is slightly worrying.
Along with my old friend Angela, I started hanging out in the Gamebird pub in Watford. It was a great meeting place for hundreds of young ravers.
It used to be packed, didn't it?
Yeah, and there was a DJ as well, wasn't there?
Those are the days, Ange.
They certainly were, darling. I can picture in platform boots and big furry, fluffy coat that came up to about here. And you walked in, everyone was like, here she comes.
But it included everybody, didn't it? I just remember all these cars just lining up and all going off to the venue. And it was like our club, our secret.
Back before the internet and mobile phones, we'd have to wait in the pub for news of secret raves, like Sunrise and Biology.
When Biology was on down the road,
yeah.
I mean, everybody turned up here and there was like, we couldn't get a car in the car park, there was cars parked all the way down that road, and you came in, the place was buzzing, and then all of a sudden it's like, this is where it's going to be, and the whole pub just emptied.
Listen to this.
Takes you back, doesn't it?
Yeah. Do you have those sort of really crap dance moves? People would do that sort of like big box, little box.
I know, yeah.
It was brilliant while the party lasted. But soon the government and the police took action to clamp down on the rave scene.
It is time to get back to basics, to self-discipline and respect for the law.
Soon new laws were passed to control the scene and make outdoor raves illegal.
You've got this government legislation, the Criminal Justice Act, which is insane looking back. Makes reference to music with repetitive beats. That's in legislation, right? The government legislated against dance music. That's how much they didn't like it.
I never understood why people couldn't go out and party. It seemed to be ridiculous to stop people wanting to enjoy themselves.
They were thinking it was like the 70s, I suppose. They were thinking it was like a political uprising, when actually it was just a whole load of people who were dancing and taking drugs.
I was a London raver, but the scene had a real impact throughout Britain, especially Manchester.
I cannot emphasise enough what a great place the Hacienda in Manchester was. I mean, it's arguably the most famous club there's ever been. Everything was sort of vivid, day-glow primary colours, and everyone wore great big wide flared trousers. and long sleeve t-shirt. My mum told me I looked triangular around that time, which was the desired effect. And my hair was centre parted and grown down here in what was elegantly known in Manchester as a bum head.
Manchester Lads, Happy Mondays and Stone Roses were two of the biggest bands to come out of the scene. When both made it onto Top of the Pops, it seemed like a real breakthrough.
Things like that would happen and you'd feel like something that you knew about had somehow got to sneak in. It felt like we had won and it was completely brilliant.
Things were changing, and not only in politics and music, new youth shows suddenly made it seem like we were also taking over TV.
The television that was going on, it felt like it was for us, that the people that were making it were from our generation. It wasn't like some stuffy adults. All of those kinds of programmes that were under the umbrella of Planet 24, Charlie Parsons, I was like, yeah, that's really impressive.
I felt, and Channel 4 agreed, that there was an appetite for an entertainment show which would be very different, aimed at 16 to 34-year-olds, and that essentially was what The Word was.
The Word. I think you've got to be really drunk to watch this show.
If I had a body like you, I probably wouldn't want to take my top off.
It was a reaction, if you like, to the kind of rather staid world of TV that had been before, and in some ways a reaction to some of the youth programmes of before, which were a little bit sort of pompous and pretentious.
It's the end of this part of the show, and it's also probably the end of my career, but thank you so much for giving me the chance. Good night.
The Word was for my generation. It had energy and attitude. It was great to see this spirit on morning television too.
Hello! It's me! How are you?
The ethos of the production company was that we put so much work into it. Every individual show was so carefully crafted and had so much in it. And I think in TV terms, it actually changed the way TV was made.
Let's see the carpet!
Like most teenagers, I wanted to be famous. Ideally a pop star like Madonna, or even a cool TV presenter. So when I saw an ad to present The Big Breakfast, I grabbed the opportunity.
Here's Chris and Paul.
No, I'm Gabby. Peter!
I had all these motivational things, like there was a picture of Charlie Parsons, like look what he's done. I had these, things like persistence beats resistance.
My first encounter with Geri was when she sent an audition tape to a strand we had on The Big Breakfast called Trash Talk, which kind of encouraged people to be wannabe presenters.
Okay, coming up, we've got news, reviews and interviews. Girls in for a treat.
I don't think it got very far, and I've got a feeling Gabby was a little bit rude about it, but it was in a whole series of things and we just had a bit of fun.
We've got that quarterback, Dan Marino, coming over. Okay, 100% will be. Okay, I'll see you right after the break.
Gabby Roslin, she took the mickey out of me and she went, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God, and I really liked her. I was so gutted. So, that's my first go. Never mind.
Move over Madonna. She said have a
It was a bit of a setback, but I didn't give up. I soon got work on live TV's Fashion Police.
Maria, what are you wearing? You're in a serious need of a makeover.
And had a Madonna cameo appearance on Dance Energy. Strike a pose. But my first proper TV success came when I appeared in front of millions in Turkey. Hard to believe now, but I recorded many shows over there and became one of the glamour girls of Turkish television. Hug that pillow, Geri.
It's a bit like The Price is Right, but this was called Let's Make a Deal. In Turkish, it's Sesh Bakalam. And so I had to, wear a gown and love that television. And I signed my first autograph.
It was a great job at the time, but I wanted to focus on my music and go back home. Since my parents' divorce, Dad had lived on a high-rise council estate in Watford. I'd always remain close to him, and I'd visit him whenever I could.
My dad, he had like this massive collection of books that he would share with me, and also a big record collection. He was just like a real character, And he was also one of these people that, when someone doesn't quite fulfill their potential but had so much of it, for various reasons, we all get dealt stuff in life, and you just think, I feel for him, you know, because he, you know, deep down he was a good man.
But in late 1993, while I was writing songs and determined to have a career in music, everything changed.
I was just in my little zone, and then what really threw me, I think, it was in the November period, my father died. I was almost paralysed by grief. I didn't have the sort of tools to process it. I have this theory, and I don't know if it's true, but I think success comes from three places. One is preparation, one is opportunity, and one is need. And I think my father's death gave me that need. It's like death energy. It drove me into sort of really sort of militant work. Okay, I'm going to do this, you know. And that went on to, you know, suddenly I met, you know, the girls in the band, and suddenly I found something that I could belong to and sort of distract myself from what, you know, all that sort of pain and grief that I just didn't understand.
In March 1994, I answered a small ad in the Stage newspaper. They wanted 5 streetwise girls to join a new band. No prizes for guessing the ringleader. This would be the beginning of my greatest adventure, the launch pad for an all-conquering girl gang.
We are so lucky. We are doing exactly what we want to do. We're pursuing a dream. I'll tell you what, there's millions of kids out there that want to be pop stars.
But success was still 2 years away. In the meantime, 5 northern lads began to drive teenage girls wild.
I mean, the thing I always liked about Take That was that they were northern, and there is a charm to their northernness, I think.
The great appeal of Take That: teenage girls, hot boys, good songs, and it been a while since anybody came along and tickled their fancy.
They were approachable and they were funny, you know. I think especially after something like, say, New Kids on the Block, where they were just seemed miles away, you know. Whereas Take That looked a bit more like somebody you might know.
So while Take That were wowing teenage girls, the teen spirit of Nirvana and American grunge was dominating rock music. I wasn't into the grunge scene, too dark for me, but I liked the way young British guitar bands responded.
Britpop was genuinely a bit of a reaction to grunge, really, and it was also a kind of magazine conceit. And they put them all together and said, you know, hooray, here we are. It's the new British invasion. We're just as good as grunge.
To me, Britpop was fresh, vibrant, with cool and clever bands like Pulp, Suede, and particularly Blur. They drew on the sound and spirit of British music from the swinging 60s.
Well, when I think of Blur's early music, I kind of think of me and Graham and Damon staying up all night and going insane, just making, like, sonic terrorism. I remember the record company coming down and absolutely freaking out, spitting nails, just going, British pop? You're mad. British pop, it's never going to work. We were young, what, 20, 21, and being in the thick of it as it happened just made us feel quite proud to be British, and I think we kind of knew we were onto something.
Blur had their own way at the start, so things got really interesting when Oasis crashed the Britpop party. Sparks flew and there was laddish rivalries in the pop playground.
Take pictures, don't ask questions.
They themselves said There's nothing that complicated about our group. It's about cigarettes and alcohol and having a good time with your mates. I think that's pretty much a verbatim Noel quote from the time. But they were just very different. They weren't art school.
The extraordinary, ordinary person was very much to the fore in that time, and it really, really made a difference because it just genuinely makes people think, I could do that. I don't have to have any privileges.
Boys being boys, it was bound to happen. I remember how in 1995 the two heavyweights of Britpop squared up in the battle for #1.
The Manchester band Oasis and their arch rivals Blur released new singles today, each hoping to reach the #1 spot next week. The music industry hasn't seen anything like it since the Beatles fought it out with the Rolling Stones in the 60s.
But despite their swagger, those northern upstarts Oasis came off second best.
But tonight, there's no denying Blur are top of the pops.
I think it's easy to overlook what a tribal thing music was. I don't know where it went wrong really, but boy it did, didn't it?
Pop culture was still about the boys. Britpop became the soundtrack to the new lad culture. And now all-day drinking was legal, the party seemed to never end.
Being in a band in the 90s was basically a license to misbehave, get drunk, tell everyone to fuck off and shag their girlfriend. Happy days.
For me, you know, Blur with Cheeky Chappies, Oasis, great songs, really good songs, but what they were emanating was a little bit too aggressive for me. You know, and that was sort of that whole ladette culture. I couldn't connect with that.
Lots of girls got in on the action too. On one hand, lads and ladettes got bad press in the tabloids, but on the other, they were celebrated by new magazines like Loaded.
Loaded became like a rock star. And actually, I think that the way women were portrayed in the women's magazines, which were all about hair and beauty and relationships, like that's all women care about, didn't represent a lot of the women I knew.
Lads was the first cover line used on Loaded magazine. So if you were involved at all in that scene and you expected to be taken as seriously as any of those men, then somehow you became a ladette.
Loaded gets historically misrepresented. You know, oh, loads full of naked women, and it genuinely wasn't. We were just honest about the fact that we fancied women. And I think when somebody's
got, you know, the full multicultural glory of Britain is kind of in there somewhere. It's clever.
If you wanna be my lover.
Wannabe was #1 all over the world, but it hadn't been an overnight success. We'd worked 2 hard years to write the music and gain control. The spirit of the 90s had empowered us to become international stars.
I think the word girl power existed before, you know, it was ever said by the Spice Girls. And what I think was good about it, just felt less harsh than the word feminism. At that time, feminism was, for me, felt like a very harsh, bra-burning word. Sometimes in life, you have to hide vegetables in chocolate. You have to wrap it up so it's much easier to digest.
I think it is first-based feminism, and any form of feminism is fine by me. So if you've got young women saying to other young women, you can do what you want, wear what you want, go out, enjoy your friends, they're just as important, if not more important than blokes, that is fine by me. And they did that all the time.
Then came the 1997 Brit Awards, which I was really proud to be part of. It was a great moment to celebrate our country, and girl power had made the front pages.
I remember I got given a black Gucci dress by this stylist, and I said, I'm going to stitch a flag onto it. And she went to me, no, that's National Front. And I just thought, no, that's not how I feel. I love all different kinds of races, and I think most of us do. That's what's brilliant about Britain. And so just because of what she said, I stitched on the back a peace sign, just to say, you know, to rebalance it, just to make sure. And that's all that was about, was just saying, you know,
Britain is great and it includes everybody and I want to celebrate it. And I think it was how everyone else was feeling. Something patriotic was happening in Britain. And it wasn't just me in my Union Jack dress. There was Noel Gallagher with his Union Jack guitar, David Bowie with his Alexander McQueen coat. Without a doubt, the Jack was back.
It was interesting because we used the Union Jack, and the Union Jack for a long time had really odd connotations.
Only a few years before that, the British flag is still associated with the right wing, with National Front, with skinheads. For me, this is finally a time when it's your ability to reinterpret what Britain is that suddenly starts to count.
I think mid-90s really made its mark as Cool Britannia. Music, fashion, culture. It was just a fantastic place to be.
Cool Britannia spread throughout, capturing the public imagination.
Everyone was just about doing stuff, getting stuff done, getting stuff made. And it made for this tremendous flowering of creativity. And I think on that basis, it's an important concept because it gave legitimacy and status to all these young creative people who otherwise might have just remained on the margins of society or culture.
The really key thing that happened in the 90s was there was a massive art revolution. Art was still something totally new. Nobody knew what the boundaries were, how rich you could get, how stupid you could be. I mean, it was brilliant.
There's Tracey Emin's Bed, which is fantastically controversial because it's an unmade bed. Well, that's what it looks like anyway. It's actually a comment on all the ways that women have been portrayed in art.
I don't think there's any point in me making a painting that was already painted 50 years ago by someone else. There's no point in making art which has already been made. For example, you won't have a scientist reinventing penicillin. It just won't happen.
The young British artist movement made stars out of working class talent, who captured the public's attention with their upfront attitude and provocative images.
And obviously you have Damien Hirst and his Shark, which becomes the iconic work of the 90s. It's a beautiful, powerful, problematic and puzzling piece of work. So these figures, Damien especially, Tracey Emin, become household names. They go from being young, at some point impoverished art students to becoming fabulously famous.
At the beginning of the 90s, modern art was a complete joke. It was written in italics or inverted commas whenever it was referred to in the newspapers. By the end of the 90s, Tate Modern was the most visited tourist attraction in Britain.
Greater opportunities for everyone allowed Kate Moss to emerge as one of the most successful supermodels.
Kate Moss is a prime example. She's an absolutely brilliant model, but she's not a conventional model by any means.
Kate Moss is pretty much the icon of the 90s. I think it's one of the few decades where it doesn't pay to be posh.
A fantastic journey for a working class girl from Croydon.
Even from the day you start, it just takes a long time to realise that you've got the option to say yes or no and to choose what you want to do.
And like me, she'd worked really hard to get there. I just remember being a Watford girl, just coming into London, you know, as a treat, and driving in and thinking, wow, this is an amazing place. And so feel pretty, looking back, pretty proud to have experienced and been part of that.
It's coming home, it's coming home, it's coming, football's coming home.
We'll go on getting back, it's on getting back, it's on getting back.
But Cool Britannia didn't just influence art and fashion and music, it even found its way onto the football field.
By some tremendous stroke of luck, the European Championships arrive in England. Everybody liked it, didn't they? 3 lines on a shirt, jewels are amazed, still gleaming. I mean, the lyrics were quite well turned, and it was, by association, it was kind of a Britpop record. Tony Blair, that autumn, I guess, when he makes his conference speech, just shamelessly takes it.
Labour's coming home. 17 years of hurt never stopped us dreaming Labour's coming home.
By that point, it's like he was in power. People look back and they forget that John Major lingered on.
In May 1997, with New Labour's landslide victory, Tony Blair found himself in number 10. We were away on tour at the time, but there was a real feel-good factor back home.
I remember, there were all those people, lots of Labour Party supporters, waving little mini Union Jacks, and it just sort of had this sense of sort of something different, something fresh, something new.
And this new Labour government will govern in the interests of all our people, the whole of this nation. That I can promise you.
I mean, I have to say, it was absolutely amazing when Tony Blair was elected. It really was. We suddenly got somebody who was young, whose family was young, who seemed quite young. It felt like an old generation had gone.
Regardless of your politics, one great thing about the new government was the number of women. Girl power had arrived in Parliament.
Suddenly, 101 Labour women MPs. It was such a large number. And I suppose it was going to happen, that they'd try and find some way to, give a badge to this. And so the badge was Blair's Babes. I have to say, at the time, I wasn't that fussed about it. I was so over the moon about us winning a general election. And it really spoke to, women outside of politics as well. And it was part of that sort of sense that anything could happen. I mean, obviously, going down to Parliament was so exciting, and it was like starting some sort of school, but it was like no school I'd ever been to. It was like Hogwarts plus sort of thing like this, that building. And at that time, my favourite was the Texas song, Say What You Want. So every time, with my husband and I driving into Westminster in those first few weeks, we had the tape set up just for that track. And as we got round the corner of Parliament Square, we'd put it in, and that would be our theme tune as we went into Parliament.
The man who likes to hang around at number 1 reached number 10 today. Is this government going in the right direction now?
In the summer of 1997, the Britpop party reached Downing Street.
Having Alistair Campbell, who came from a newspaper background, to manage his spin, if you like, as it was called later, was very, very important in both his victory and the way he performed.
I think one of the differences between the 90s and maybe the 70s and 80s was that the machinations of government became more apparent. There was a lot more visibility, there was much more transparency in the way that politics was spun.
Part of the spin thing is that we had pretty much of a battering from sections of the media. So there was, if you like, message discipline, but it was from trying to make sure that we did everything we could to enable Labour to be seen as credible and confident in what we were doing in government.
It was a time when everyone began to recognise the power of positive publicity, and it didn't do us any harm. It was an amazing adventure for the Spice Girls. We were travelling the world, constantly touring and promoting, rubbing shoulders with royalty and becoming the biggest selling girl group of all time.
I joined Smash Hits as an editor, and we'd get the charts faxed over because it was the 90s. And it would be, they're number 1 in something like 39 territories, and you just go, what? They were having hits in countries they'd probably never heard of. It was phenomenal.
For me, when I got my first, fat check, there was one thing that really epitomised, okay, freedom, optimism, and that was the little red car that, you know, I had envisioned when I was a child. You know, if you had that open top car, and that was one of the first things I went and bought. First thing I did was go and buy this very car, and I was like, wow, I've arrived. And for me, I think money represented freedom as well, and this car was like, yeah, you know, I can have a say in my own destiny. This is it. Woo!
With Britain at the centre of the world, at the height of cool Britannia, tragic events in Paris reminded us of our own mortality.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris. She was taken to hospital in the early hours of this morning. Surgeons tried to save her life for 2 hours, but she died at 4 o'clock.
One of the things that really struck me when Princess Diana died was, you know, the outpour of grief. And, you know, there was a huge amount of grief that sort of flooded the nation. Obviously, she embodied so many qualities that, you know, we all admired. And the only thing I think that came positive out of it is that, you know, as a nation, everyone came together and was incredibly supportive and were very affectionate with each other in grieving.
I mean, it was just so inexplicable, really. And of course, a lot's been said since, but I think, you know, Tony, the words he found on that day just seemed to sort of speak to the country and very much reflect people's sorrow of what had happened to this young mum. And I was a young mum and could identify with that as well.
She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort. She was the people's princess, and that's how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
Princess Diana's death had a huge impact on everyone, including me. It was this, followed by a visit to South Africa for an inspiring meeting with Nelson Mandela, that made me reflect on my own path in life.
I think meeting Mandela is just one of those, an absolute privileged moment. He was charming and gracious and humble and welcoming. So to be able to have met that man of that stature was just amazing.
You're as young as the girl you feel, and I'm 25.
So when I got back to the UK, I made the biggest decision of my young life.
Well, after days of speculation, Geri Halliwell, otherwise known as Ginger Spice, has confirmed that she has left the Spice Girls.
At the age of 25, it was hard leaving the band. It had been an incredible experience for a Watford girl, but my Spice Girl journey had come to an end.
I found in life, when you're going through a series of challenges, you find out two things. One is what you're made of and who, you know, really are your good, true friends. And I think, you know, there was a period of time after I'd left the Spice Girls, you know, and I was really needing a little support and direction. And, you know, I found a really good friend, and that was George Michael. He said to me, oh, do you want to come to my house for the weekend? And I'd met him a few times, and by then I'd realised I'm not his kind of girl. I'm not for him. It wasn't going to happen. But instead he became a really good friend, and he said, come and stay with me. And so I did, and I stayed quite a while. I think I may have, I don't know if I overstayed my welcome, but I did stay. They always say be careful about, you know, meeting your idols because they never can live up to what you think, but actually he became something better. For me, if there's one track that really captures George at his best, it has to be Freedom. I really love this song. During the making of this documentary, I heard the sad news that George had passed away. As well as a great artist, he was kind, generous, he loved his family and was a good friend. I'll never forget him. In the summer of 1998, I started to take decisions about life after the Spice Girls and sell off some of my most treasured possessions for charity. I was moving on from the band and I wanted to say, you know, this is a fresh start, and I thought maybe we could do some good about all the things that I accumulated, so I sold off some of my clothes for charity and that car. And it was one of those things, you know, it felt, yes, very cleansing, but I think I always was a little bit nostalgic and a little bit regretful, if I'm honest. And I'd always sort of harp on about it. I think, oh, that was such a cute car. I accepted the invitation to become a Goodwill ambassador for the United Nations, educating young women around the world on sexual health.
I believe that everybody deserves to have control of their life, and that means having control over your fertility.
What I learned was that most people want to be heard, and we all deserve education, and when you give people education, it gives them choices. And you know, you could bring the world's press with you and go, look, I don't know the answers, but well, look at this. And suddenly
So when she did that, and she thought in her mind it was Marilyn Monroe, I thought, I don't know about Princess Charles what she thought he was, if Kennedy, I suppose. But in the fantasy world, that it was fantastic. It was that time. I never ever forgot about that it was very good.
The 90s might be best remembered for the Spice Girls, rave, boy bands, Britpop and Cool Britannia. But it also saw the emergence of many strong female artists, independent women in charge of their own destinies.
I think society goes through waves. It's like a pendulum that swings. And suddenly we had a real flush of great female artists. And normally when it comes out very proud.
The Spice Girls opened the barn door for other women to come through, and you really can't underestimate what they've done in terms of just allowing other women to find a voice, have a voice.
Deep down, I was scared to go solo. With a clutch of new songs I'd written, in 1998 I joined up again with producers Paul and Andy from Absolute, who'd worked with me in the Spice Girls. I wrote and recorded my debut solo album back at the old studio on the Thames. It's now a Windows factory.
Oh my God.
Do you remember any of it?
Yeah, I do, but obviously it's changed.
Used to be a pool table, wasn't there?
Pool table, yes.
It's kind of like the chill out bit and kind of everybody
Didn't we
hanging.
used to have all our discs on the wall there?
That sounds a bit pretentious, but yeah. Didn't we used to have all our platinum discs? Yeah, I think we did.
We had a blind optimism that she would be accepted because of who she was, and that people would accept what she did musically, and it turned out we were right in that respect.
This is where we used to do all the writing?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh
We
my
had a
God.
computer down there, mixing desk there, speakers at the back, sofa.
Okay, I'm being transported back.
Are you?
Yeah, oh my God. Every day we just go to the studio, write, and it was just a really liberating, freeing thing to do.
She would come in and go, right, I want a bit of this, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. You usually want it all in one song, about 35 different ideas.
Yeah, when the reality is we'd be going like, how the hell are we going to do this?
Hence, that's why the album became Schizophonic, because it
Yeah,
changes,
so all over
it's
the
all over
place.
the place. But it's,
Yeah. The album was called Schizophonic, and it kind of meant, you know, it means split sound, but actually it was saying, you know, there's two sides of me, and look at me the first song, was very much about saying, look at me, but actually can we really see, really look at me, not just on face value.
Look at me. You can take it all because this face is free. Maybe next time use your eyes and...
I think my most creative memory of that whole album was just the production of Look at Me. It was like a revolving door of musicians and ideas.
I can even do reality.
It was just the track we all fell in love with off the album and kind of got the most excited about writing. Then we got to the middle eight and we're going, I don't know what we're going to do. Geri's like, well, I already know what I'm doing in the video. I'm going to kill Ginger Spice, and so I want the middle eight to be all about the death of Ginger Spice.
Wow.
Well, that's the vocal booth.
This is where I'd have my sort of like emotional moments of like, oh, I'm
sure
scared.
I made you cry a few times.
Yeah, I'm sure I cried a couple of times. Because it's quite, you feel vulnerable, don't you, when you're singing and putting yourself out there. I was scared. There was always a bit of scepticism, and so when it did well, it was just so validating and brilliant to feel that connection with people.
This next lady took a huge risk going solo, but what a result! She's just done the treble, she's back on top. It's Geri, see ya!
Take me back to my sweet la vida. Find my love, my dolce vita.
I was thrilled by the success of the album. My Chico Latino was inspired by my Spanish roots. Thank God I followed my heart. It got me 4 #1 records.
Geri burnt really brightly, really quickly, and she did some really smart videos in a time when video really mattered. And she was really good at making herself relevant the whole time. And she Geri'd it up.
When the new millennium arrived, Britain celebrated in style. Looking back on the 90s, the world had changed so much in so many different ways. It'd been a magical decade for me, one of real opportunities, and I still feel that in many ways. It was such a positive time to be young and British.
The 90s for me were incredibly exciting because a lot of alternative, interesting, artistic people came through and made their mark, and they changed things. They really did change things.
The values involved at that time were all about possibility, were all about openness. I think for those reasons it's important to celebrate the 90s.
It was probably the last great opportunity to be ridiculous and get away with it.
What better way to end my decade? Celebrating femininity and with humour at the 2000 Brit Awards.
I don't think we knew much about the actual performance. We were invited.
She did tell us a bit about it. She said you're going to be quite surprised. What
I think
I'm
she
gonna
kept
do.
it from us, you know. So it was like, and so I don't remember kind of going,
Yeah.
there's going to be a big pair of legs and Geri's going to come flying out of a vagina. On top of that, she's pole dancing, and so it's like, you know, it wasn't subtle, that's for sure.
I think it's so important to be able to have humour. I think it's a very British way to sort of get through some of the painful stuff, to laugh at yourself. You think, oh God, you're taking yourself way too seriously, love. Get over it. So I think, you know, that album for me was a really good reminder that just be honest, be yourself, get on with it. It was a good end to that decade.
We've come a long way. That little kid with a red car. The little girl who became Ginger Spice.
It is absolutely, it is nothing like anyone imagined. It's not glamorous at all.
But I've realised, however much we've changed over the years, we're still the same people at heart. I guess this journey back in time has helped me look forwards too, towards the road ahead and the next stage of my life, and making more music. And if there's one thing that will always remind me of the 90s, it's this: the little red car I dreamed of as a child.
On my birthday, my lovely husband found the very car. I think it was 17 years later since I sold it. The guy that had bought it in the auction had still got it. I swear to you, I started crying when I saw it. I couldn't believe it. This car represents the 90s dream, the freedom, and this little MGB Roadster is me. I just love it.